Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, have no worries. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
2 elections and months of negotiations have passed, yet Israel's worst political fears are creeping ever closer. Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz has failed in his mandate to form a coalition following incumbent Prime Minister Netanyahu's first attempt. And now, for the first time in Israel's history, the nation's new Knesset has just 21 days to prevent a landmark third election.
It's kind of sad. I'm just disappointed, and that's it. From one side, I'm disappointed. From the other side, I'm happy because that means that we are. This is a real democracy.
But in announcing his failure Wednesday night, Gantz is blasting Netanyahu and his right-wing bloc for tanking the negotiations. He says he asked the prime minister to conduct talks, but was met with insults, slander, and childish videos. Gantz also alleges that Netanyahu's interests are more focused on saving himself from indictments than they are on serving the country.
28 הימים האחרונים הפכתי כל אבן וסילקתי כל גרגר חול בניסיון להקים ממשלה המביאה לישראל מנהיגות של כבוד, מנהיגות של מוסר, של ערכים, מנהיגות שנשכחה. הוצב בלוק המתקשה לראות, בלוק המתעקש לראות את טובתו האישית של אדם אחד לפני טובתם של החולים השוכבים במסדרונות.
That being said, Gantz is still promising to continue working towards a unity coalition in the coming weeks. And meanwhile, Netanyahu is similarly inviting Gantz to discuss a unity government without preconditions. At the same time, he's attacking Gantz for trying to spin his own failure, though.
בני גנץ, אני לא אתייחס לכל הדברים המופרכים שאמרת עליי הערב, וגם על הכישלון שלך בהקמת ממשלת אחדות. זה לא כי התעקשת לפרק את הבלוק. הרי כפי שאריה דרעי חשף היום, אתם בעצמכם פניתם למפלגות החרדיות, וניסיתם לשדל אותם בכל, כדי שיצטרפו אליכם לשלטון. וחוץ מזה היית מוכן להקים ממשלת מיעוט עם תומכי טרור, שמקבלים את ההנחיות שלהם מאויבי ישראל. ולכן בואו לא נספר סיפורים. אבל דבר אחד אמרת נכון, ישראל זקוקה לממשלת אחדות. הרי כולם רואים מול מה אנחנו עומדים היום.
The Prime Minister goes on to explain how, for the sake of security and the will of the Israeli people, a unity must be formed as soon as possible. But just in case, Netanyahu's Likud party is also preparing for an eventuality where the country is sucked back into a vote. The Likud Central Committee is convening December 5th to vote on canceling primary elections for leadership and party listings in the Likud, so that if third elections are called, the Likud will continue as is with Netanyahu at the helm. The last time Netanyahu was challenged for Likud leadership was in 2014. Now, with Gantz returning the mandate to President Rivlin, Israel is entering uncharted territory. But if you're confused as to what comes next, don't worry. ILTV's Shanna Fuld has the breakdown.
History is in the making. Never before has the Jewish state gone to second elections, let alone a third. And in fact, the country has never failed to form a government in the first round of coalition talks. But as the old saying goes, there's a first time for everything. And here's what you can expect from the next few weeks. Starting at midnight Thursday morning, the current members of Knesset will have just 21 days, or until December 11th, to propose a candidate who can form a new government. It can literally be anyone in parliament, including Netanyahu and Gantz. And unlike the first and second mandates, President Rivlin will have very little, if any, control over who's chosen. Instead, the 120 Knesset members will have the opportunity to vote for themselves and back a politician or several politicians for prime minister. But at least 61 MKs, or 51% of the government, must support any potential candidate, who will then have 2 weeks from the nomination to negotiate the terms of a coalition. Because if no one is chosen, or if he or she fails before their deadline, it's back to elections in March, which would be the third round of elections in under 1 year for Israel.
Our top news tonight, tensions in the north are rising, and the IDF is now preparing for a possible Iranian attack following Israeli airstrikes on Iranian and Assad regime targets in Syria overnight. And claiming responsibility for the strikes, which is rare for the IDF, the army says they're in retaliation for the launching of Iranian rockets from Syria the day before. While the IDF reports hitting dozens of Iranian Quds Force military targets, and at least 11 people are confirmed killed, 7 of whom are likely Iranian. And Israel is also warning Syria not to allow any more escalation from within their borders. But just in case, the army says it's preparing for defense and attack on a wide range of scale. Loud explosions could be heard across the Syrian southwest, meanwhile, including over Damascus, and video of the attacks show loud explosions as Syrian air defenses activated, intercepting some of the airstrikes. But the IDF reports destroying at least 6 Syrian air defense batteries, multiple Iranian IRGC bases in Syria, and a building staffed by Iranians at the Damascus International Airport. Israel avoided Syria's Russian-made S-300 defense systems, however, over the presence of Russian troops, and the IDF says that it also coordinated the strikes with Moscow beforehand. Then, coincidentally, the IDF just concluded another surprise military drill in the north designed to test the Jewish state's response time to conflict. Thousands of reservists were called up to simulate the turnover from everyday to emergency and from defense to attack, including the gathering of troops and weapons, the delivery of arms and equipment, and troop movements throughout the region. This is the second such surprise drill held in the Northern Command under Chief of Staff Kochavi. Just as relative quiet begins to set in along the south, Israeli defense forces have announced 4 rockets launched towards Israel's northern Golan Heights. The Iron Dome defense system reportedly intercepted all the rockets, though, and the IDF says it's unlikely that any projectiles actually landed within Israel's borders. But in any case, the rockets were reportedly launched by an Iranian or Iranian proxy force from the area around Damascus in Syria around 5 a.m. And they're supposedly in response to a recent alleged attack. As per policy, though, Israel has neither commented on nor claimed responsibility for any recent assaults. Israel does appear, however, to have retaliated against the early morning rockets, as the Syrian Monitoring Center for Human Rights claims that shortly after Israel was attacked, there was a corresponding 5 missiles launched at targets in south and southwest Damascus. Then finally, state-run Syrian media also says that the blast hit near Damascus International Airport without offering further details. And following the flare-ups, Israeli officials say that no special safety precautions would be in place in the north. Moving on, there's been a major change in the United States' foreign policy following the highly controversial EU labeling ruling, and it's sending shockwaves through the Middle East.
The Trump administration is reversing the Obama administration's approach towards Israeli settlements. U.S. public statements on settlement activities in the West Bank have been inconsistent over decades.
In a breaking news broadcast, United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has just announced that the United States will no longer consider Israeli settlements in the disputed territories to be illegal per se under international law. And this includes East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. But Pompeo's announcement challenges the notion held by countries around the world that Jewish settlements are de facto illegal and therefore an obstruction to peace, which is why Israeli leaders like both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Benny Gantz are applauding Washington's decision.
אזרחי ישראל, זהו יום היסטורי ועוד הישג עצום למדיניות שלנו. אחרי שהנשיא טראמפ הכיר בירושלים כבירת ישראל, הכיר בריבונותנו ברמת הגולן, עכשיו הממשל האמריקני שם קץ לשקר שההתנחלויות הן בלתי חוקיות. אני מודה לנשיא טראמפ ואני מודה למזכיר המדינה פומפאו.
Then the move also returns the United States' Middle East foreign policy back to the Reagan era. In 1978, the United States State Department held a legal opinion that settlements are inconsistent with international law. Then in 1981, President Reagan challenged that idea, and it wasn't until 2016 that Secretary of State John Kerry changed the policy again to its most recent form by publicly claiming the settlements to be illegal. Meanwhile, the new policy shift comes just days after the EU High Court's ruling against the Psagot winery's appeal, saying that all Jewish Israeli products from disputed territories must be labeled as such. Psagot first petitioned against the labeling in France, calling it discriminatory, a double standard, and an attempt to boycott Israeli businesses in support of the BDS movement. Now, in addition to the EU labeling case, it seems that Israel has just lost another battle in the international arena. In a sweeping vote of 170-2, the United Nations has voted to extend the mandate for UNRWA, the controversial Palestinian aid organization. But Israel and the United States accuse UNRWA of perpetuating the very conflict that it was formed to help end. For one, under UNRWA's definitions, refugee status is afforded to Palestinians across generational lines, which is why the number of refugees has exploded exponentially, and that also makes for an untenable resettlement situation. Meanwhile, all other refugees on Earth under the auspices of the UNHCR must be first-generation displaced. Then there's also the many allegations against UNRWA of impropriety, corruption, and more, which stretch across years. UNRWA's Commissioner General, Pierre Cranbuol, even just resigned ahead of the vote over alleged misconduct. And UNRWA has in the past also employed Hamas terror group members and has housed weapons in schools and offices, all while still to this day publishing anti-Israel hate in its educational materials. But regardless, UNRWA appears here to stay, and as an added insult to injury, renewing UNRWA was just one of the 8 resolutions concerning Israel that the UN adopted over the weekend. Among the others was a condemnation of Israel for control over the Golan Heights and an approval for a special committee designed to investigate alleged Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinians and other Arabs in the region. In other news, even in times of crisis, like during the last few days of Gazan rocket barrages, life finds a way to pull through. Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists fired over 450 rockets and mortars into southern Israeli communities in just 48 hours last week, sending tens of thousands to the shelters and closing down a third of the country. But the explosions and war cries typically associated with death and destruction helped breathe new life into 21 Israelis at the Barzilai Medical Center in the battlefront city of Ashkelon, as 21 new babies were born. But how did the rockets help, you ask? Well, they didn't help medically, of course, but the average birth rate for this time frame is between 12 and 14 newborns. So it was the increased tensions in the maternity ward that actually led to an increase in labor. Then meanwhile, an Israeli app is now also making its mark in this latest escalation. Navin Systems, an Israeli pedestrian guidance and navigation application, has primarily been focused on mapping out interiors of places with weak reception. But now the peer-powered app is being used to point civilians towards their nearest bomb shelters. And it's already available to people in Tel Aviv and the southern city of Beersheba, which has just been hit by an additional 2 rockets over the weekend. Moving on, the rate of anti-Semitism in Europe is again hitting record numbers that have not been seen since the days of the Holocaust. According to a shocking new report, 1 in 4 Europeans holds anti-Semitic beliefs, and that number is on the rise, especially in Western Europe. The New York-based Anti-Defamation League polled 14 countries throughout Europe for the survey, and the countries most hostile to Jews include Poland, Ukraine, and Hungary. As if to prove the point, though, on Monday, a 76-year-old man in Berlin, Germany, was punched in the face by a teenager in an apparent anti-Semitic-inspired hate crime. The young man reportedly blocked the victim's path and asked, "What do you want, you Jew?" before beginning his assault. Thankfully, a 29-year-old passerby grabbed the attacker and held him down, though, until police arrived. And the 76-year-old man, who isn't even actually Jewish, has sustained injuries to his forehead and nose. This follows a similar situation that happened in October in the same district too, where a 70-year-old man was berated with anti-Semitic comments and then physically assaulted. Finally, moving to New York, an Orthodox Jewish man was stabbed multiple times yesterday in Muncie while walking to morning prayers at a nearby synagogue. And the attack happened before 6 a.m. near the religious center and marks the latest in a series of serious recent attacks. But responding to such attacks and in hopes of curbing the trend, the ADL is now launching its No Place for Hate program with the Brooklyn Borough, and it's doubling its funding in order to spread the word to twice as many schools.
And I'm saying to the men and women of the police department, we cannot ignore the crimes. We have to report them the way they are. If it's a hate crime, we have to report it. We can't sugarcoat it, we can't try to downgrade it. I know there's a tendency to want the numbers not to be as high as they're supposed to be, but we cannot live in a cosmetic universe that we are living in a unified fashion. We must report them the way they are and then devise effective solutions to correct them.
Now, to much shock and surprise, Israeli medical researchers are unveiling their next big innovation, and it could change the lives of nearly 500 million people. Those who suffer from and live with diabetes know well what a restriction having to take insulin shots can be. But diabetics may not need to rely on this treatment forever because the future has arrived with the artificial pancreas. And an Israeli startup called Betalin Therapeutics is opening the application process for patients who want to get in on the list for the artificial organ. Now, attempts at taking beta cells, which create insulin from donors with healthy pancreases, have been made in the past, but those cells are unable to survive in the body without the support of the original pancreas, and they're also often worn down by the immunosuppressive drugs that diabetes patients take. Well, with the artificial pancreas, the implanted cells have a better support system and can survive on their own, and the fake organ, which is implanted into the leg, is made up with lung tissue from a pig and insulin-secreting beta cells that either come from a donor or are created in the lab. Finally, the implant is expected to initially cost around $50,000, with the surgery taking just about an hour. All right, now, do you feel pain in your step? Well, meniscal injuries are one of the most common knee injuries for Americans, but thanks to a new technology coming out of Israel, people who need a new meniscus are in luck. And ILTV's Nittany Manson has the details.
In a landmark surgery earlier this month, 2 Israelis became the first patients to have ever received artificial menisci in their knees. The meniscus is a crescent-shaped cartilage that sits in the wrist, knees, and select other joints. And whether from playing sports, walking wrong, or just day-to-day wear and tear, it's surprisingly not that hard to tear your meniscus. In fact, about 750,000 procedures are performed each year in the U.S. alone, replacing the cushy shock-absorbing tissue pad between the thigh and shin bone. Also, transplant tissue is a very scarce commodity in many countries, and studies show that many people who get natural transplants continue to experience pain, often eventually getting a full knee replacement anyways. Well, Israeli researchers in Netanya have been working with Active Implants, a company headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee, and together they've now made artificial menisci available commercially. The product has been in development since 2006, and the so-called new surface meniscus implant will be used first in Israel and then in Europe, with the goal of replacing the meniscus and avoiding pain or extensive physical therapy. Also, the implant is inserted into the knee through a small incision, so patients can usually go home soon after the operation is over. Then finally, Active Implant's CEO says it's very exciting to finally bring the device to the people of Israel, where the implant was invented and developed. And the product is currently going through trials with the US FDA.
Oh, what an amazing game. On another note, marathon runners are their own breed, but there's one special woman in Israel who sets her own rules, and she might just be running all the way to Japan for the 2020 Olympics. ILTV's Nittany Manson has the story.
Didi Deutsch is just about 7 minutes away from the guaranteed qualification time for a marathon run. But to be a shoo-in, you need to run 26 miles in about 2 hours and 29 minutes. And Deutsch's personal best comes in at a time of 2 hours and 36 minutes. It doesn't mean she can't make one of the top 80 international spots for runners, though. And anyway, having her eyes on the marathon isn't the only thing that sets Deutsch apart from other women in Israel either. She's also just 30 years old, a mother of 5, an active Instagrammer with 8,500 followers, and she runs in full-length clothes due to her ultra-Orthodox Jewish religious observance. Also originally from the US, Deutsch moved to Israel at age 19, where she got married and started a family with her Orthodox husband, Michael. And she only picked up running at the age of 26 as a way to lose the pregnancy weight. Well, now she's one of the top 3 female distance runners in Israel. In fact, Deutsch runs 90 miles every week, in addition to 2 daily workouts, and friends and family say that when she sets her mind to something, she does it.
In other news, often touted as one of the wonders of the world, the Dead Sea is a natural marvel. But with water levels receding every year, some of us are wondering what's causing the shrinkage. And ILTV's Shanna Fuld set out to find the answer.
Tourists love taking home Dead Sea products because they feel like it's their own little authentic bite of Israel. But what does that do to the water levels in the Dead Sea? It's a scientific fact that the Dead Sea is shrinking, and I wanted to find out if sea salt and other cosmetic products are impacting it.
No, I'm not buying a product that's the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is dying and getting smaller and smaller every year.
I don't live here, so I can't, I just come to visit, and I buy this as a gift to a friend.
Here's the good news. Dead Sea products are not number 1 on the list for reasons that the Dead Sea is receding. So, don't feel too bad.
Cosmetics, I think it's really minor or even negligible. The fertilizers, which are the potassium products, they are related to the negative water budget of the Dead Sea. But the cosmetic products are really negligible.
The Dead Sea loses just about 4 feet of water each year. And even though the water levels are affected by wet or dry seasons, researchers say the water is evaporating rapidly, and a third of that reason is due to the potassium industry. Jordan and Israel both manufacture minerals by taking potassium off of Dead Sea brine that have been evaporating out in the sun. This raw material is shipped out and harvested as agricultural fertilizer.
More than 10% of world agriculture is based on these fertilizers. And the industries, both Israel and Jordanian, are responsible for level decline of total of more than 40 centimeters per year out of the 1.2 meter.
The lake level is also lowering due to a diversion of water. Fresh water that used to flow in from upstream the Jordan River, Israel's Lake Kinneret, the Yarmouk River in Syria, and eastern Jordanian streams have all been redirected into reservoirs for drinking water. Once these resources were cut off, the level of water began to decline since water is simultaneously evaporating from the lake's surface.
The decision makers have to think of the long-term consequences of level decline. We scientists help them, and we also provide to the scientific community and the insights from this unique lake that is under stress.
So while researchers like Dr. Lenski from the Dead Sea Observatory are hard at work trying to save the environment, you don't have to be too apologetic.
Sorry for that, but yes.
Mud mask, anyone?
All right, now for our final story tonight, we head back to Jerusalem, where international journalists are covering the latest coalition and election news. But this story is less about the elections and more about the media that's covering it. Because like most Israelis, those in the media are just as exhausted by the prospects of another vote, if not more so. And President Rivlin knows this well. So to break the tensions and introduce some much-needed levity, Rivlin and his staff celebrated the third round of talks by preparing a treat for the journalists stationed at his residence. The team prepared and handed out ice cream with a note reading, "Third time means ice cream," in Israeli play on the saying, "Third time's the charm." And spokeswoman for the president's house, Naomi Toledano Kendall, explained simply that, again, if we don't laugh, we'll cry.
That's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. See you next week.